Welcome to CONEXEC, a global leadership platform for construction executives. Today, I have Matt with me. I can't pronounce your last name, Matt, so you're going to have to do it.
DiBara.
DiBara. Okay. I got it. So it's not spelled that way. Okay. I mean, just so uh, so I'm here with Matt today, Matt DiBara, and I want him to talk about himself a little bit and about his company. So Matt, tell us about first of all yourself. You know, I know you're in LA now. I know you're from Boston, but I don't know much more about you. So tell me your story, where you grew up exactly, and how you end up where you are.
Yeah, great. So really excited to be on. Thank you for having me, first and foremost. Um, yeah, my background in construction is a little unique. I grew up. I remember my first day in the field. I was 9 years old, and for a while, my dad was trying to get me to work with him in the family masonry business.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom's like, "He's too young. He's too young." And there was one summer where I was cooped up, and I had a lot of energy. And so my mom's like, "You know what? Take him. Finally, you can have him." So my my first day at work, I was 9 years old, and my dad walked me over to the cement mixer, and there was a 94-pound bag of Portland cement, and he's like, "All right," showed me how to mix, and I was like, "I'm 60, 70 pounds." I was like, "I can't lift that." He's like, "I know," and he handed me a razor knife, and he cut the bag. He's like, "4 shovels is a half bag, 8 is a full bag. Have at it." And that was my first day of construction.
Oh
So
shoot.
yeah. So, it was interesting though because I never received any favoritism,
Mm-hmm.
which I hated at the time. But I developed fast in the industry because my dad taught me at an early age to be humble, and that your path to growth is your greatness. Um, and he really instilled that at a young age. And the only thing I can equate it to is the movie The Karate Kid, because that's now that I understand enough about it, I see that's what he was doing. My first job was mixing mortar. My second job was picking up the trash on the job site. But it was all about taking ownership and understanding the fundamentals before I grew into a mason, and then a foreman, and then running crews, and then obviously, having the business out here in Los Angeles, Masonry and Concrete Company, voted top masonry and concrete company by Industry Oversight last year here in Los Angeles. So it's been a fun, exciting experience.
Isn't it funny how like some of those things that your parents do to you at the time you absolutely hate? Because I work for my father too, and I absolutely hate. And I have both of my sons work for my company, and I have a tendency to treat them a little bit rougher than I have to other. But in hindsight, I know that they'll appreciate it. You know, like you, because it taught you a lot of good things like work ethic.
Oh
So.
yeah, I mean, it was yeah.
So tell me about your company. You mentioned something briefly, but how did you get started in your company, and what do you guys do today, and kind of what does the future look like?
Yeah, that's a great. I love talking about that. So, I came out to Los Angeles, and I obviously masonry and concrete's my passion, or one of them, right? So I moved out here, and I wasn't sure that I was going to do that business here. Um, but when I realized that there was a lack of true masons, like I had worked with guys who, were in their 60s and 70s, when I was a kid, and they learned from people. So I mean, if you trace that back, the people who taught them, I mean, you're going back, late 1800s, were the people that mentored them. So it was unique for me. And when I realized there was a shortage of this level of craftsmanship and pride in Los Angeles, um, it was just one of those things. I saw the need, I had the passion, and I said, well, we're going to grow a business here. And so, we do commercial, we do some public work, we do residential. So we're in all three sectors, um, and it's predominantly masonry and concrete work.
You know what's interesting about like masonry and concrete is that there's been changes, but no significant changes. I there's mixes, but it's essentially a lot of the same stuff. Just evolved over the generations.
And that's what's interesting about it is I feel like, in my experience, I feel like masonry and concrete is really like the last frontier. If you look at a lot of the
Hmm.
other industries like electrical, HVAC, plumbing, even demolition, I mean, all these industries, if you look at a spec packet for a commercial project, all the different divisions, division 0, 2, 3, 4, I'm 3 and 4, but it's, you look at that, and you can see there's not much. I mean, even from what my dad did and my grandfather, and my great grandfather. So I'm a fourth generation Mason in my family. They've been doing it we trace it back to Italy 102 years ago.
Oh wow.
Um, and not much really has changed at all. I mean, I have my grandfather's trowel, and it doesn't look much different than the one I used, 6 years
Yeah.
ago. So it's an interesting industry to say the least.
So, uh, talking about like your business model, what do you believe has been the most significant event that you've had, whether it's personal or professional, that has affected the business model you have today?
Yeah, I think there's two of them, right? And they kind of go tied together. Well, the biggest thing I remember was my grandfather and my grandfather who learned from my great grandfathers. They came over here from Italy in the early 1900s, and the only thing they knew was masonry and concrete. And so they bought land, they dug a hole in the ground, built the basement walls, capped the first floor, and then lived in the basement while they built the rest of the house themselves. Both of them did that, and they never intended to be contractors. As a matter of fact, they were savvy, entrepreneurs. What happened was kind of like me in Los Angeles was they were working for neighbors, and so when they built their house, the neighbor would say, "Hey, can you help me with my wall or my brickwork, or can you put in a pizza oven like you have at your house?" And so my family ethos came from working for neighbors, and so one thing that really happens when you work for a neighbor is you don't do crappy work, you don't you
Yeah,
don't
they're not
cheat
your, they're not a
neighbors.
good neighbor after that point.
None of that. So, my grandfather instilled in my father and myself at a young age. It was like we didn't care because we did commercial work even when I was young. I mean, we were doing post office. I did, some of the most iconic restoration projects in Boston and outside of Boston. It was like the same ethos. It was like you treat every client, whether it's a huge public job or a small residential job, like they're your neighbor. Um, right down to not putting trash on the ground or communicating openly and making sure there's access, just all the basic things you would do to be a good neighbor. um, I think shaped a huge portion of how I run this company, and just who I am as a person.
And it's funny, like if you take that model, when I lived in Chicago, they were building a house across the street, and before they started, the builder came over and just introduced himself, shook my hand, said, "If there's any problems at all, let me know." And he gave me his card and the whole deal. And then one of the concrete trucks came on my, came on my grass, jumped the curb, went on my grass. I just called him up. He had somebody out there to fix it, and it was no big deal, And it's funny how like treat people like the way you'd like to be treated. How that actually I always say people treat people better than the way you would like to be treated. Um, so have you had any game changing events that have occurred in your events that you can think of that would be like you'd say that has been the game changing event, and it may just be COVID like we're going through right now. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, COVID's definitely been a big one, game changing in terms of growth and perspective, or in terms of kind of like my as an executive and a leader of the business.
Just in general, .
Yeah, I mean, I think COVID's one of those things where I'm always somebody who, if you're not innovating and growing and pushing the pendulum, there's a saying that I have: flat lines fall. And what I mean by that is if you look at your revenue, right, from an executive perspective, if your revenues are flat, chances are they're going to fall eventually,
Hmm.
right? So I always say flat lines fall. That's the management executive, conversations we have. And so for me, it's like, what are we doing to grow? What are we doing to offer more value? And I think we always look at problems as opportunities. And so I would say COVID has been huge, um, because we looked at it as an opportunity to really to serve and to develop our. For example, I'll make it tangible, right? We in the residential sector, a lot of clients didn't want to meet right away. They were scared of COVID, but they still had work they needed to get done. Retaining walls falling over, or I have to do my driveway. I'm in the middle of a project. It's a mud pit, whatever, right?
Hmm.
So what we did was we created a virtual process where they could send in photos and we could quote it within 10-15%, give or take, on most projects without them ever meeting us to know if we're a good fit. So it's COVID, I think, is the event, but the cultural mindset is how do we take any problem and turn it into an opportunity.
And that, and it's when you said about that, if you flatline, you'll decline. I remember, I used to work for a $1 billion construction company, and the CEO used to always say, he goes, business is a tree. It either grows or dies. There is no in between. It never stays the same. So I just thought about that when
Yeah.
you said that. But so how are you guys preparing for the future? It sounds like you have have changed the way you're doing business right now to get you through this pandemic. But in the future in general, are you doing anything? Um, your industry has a lot of history. There's a lot of things that have been done. There have been some innovations, but in generally, I mean, you like as you said, you've used the same trowel, as your grandfather. So, um, what what kind of things are you doing to prepare for the future?
Well, I think one of the things we have to confront in construction is that there's where technology is going to be paramount, right? So I think that what we're going to see is we're going to see more and more uh, sectors of construction become automated, or they're going to shift in terms of how they're manufactured. They're going to be easier to assemble.
Hmm.
So I think we have to embrace technology, number one, and we're doing that in my company. Hence the virtual estimating, a lot of the things we do. I think another thing is integration. um, I remember when I was in college, 7, 8 years, 9 years ago, right? We were looking at building information modeling, or BIM, and we were at the precipice of really making sure. I think gone are the days where the trade just looks at their individual trade, right?
Hmm.
And the general contractor is the one piecing everything together. I think we need more, and the future is going to lend to more trades really looking at how they integrate with other trades and taking ownership and responsibility. And I think those are the companies that are going to grow and develop and take more market shares. If you have two subcontractors, right, from a GC perspective, and one of them's 10% less, but the one that's 10% more is going to oversee, the they're going to take ownership of not just their sector, but all the transition points, right? Because it's always the middle point where a lot of things fall through. It's like, well,
Hmm.
the conduit wasn't shown on the plans, so it's not my scope. I'm just the framer. It's like, well, but you knew the electrical had to go somewhere.
Hmm.
It's like, I think, and it ties together. That ownership comes with technology and integration, and that's always been an area I think anybody in construction, executive or owner, can look at and see an opportunity, because there's going to be a wider gap, I think, in terms of things that are just easy. Another tangible example: they created a stackable, masonry product for a lot of the retaining walls, like garden walls. So
Hmm.
that was something where, for us, or even stonework, used to be things that required artistry and talent. And as soon as they came up with these two systems, it was like your landscaper's doing it, your gardener's doing it. Like, it just cut a chunk of our business out, which was fine because we were already leaning towards things that required more experience, more technology, more management. We were offering value. So to prepare and grow, that's the way we've been able to do it.
So we talk about planning and about how important planning is, and my company, we have a 10-year plan, because my 10-year plan is that in 10 years I'm going to be transferring ownership from myself to my employees. um, and can you tell me about some of the things that you're going to do in the next 5 years or 10 years, or that you guys have it as part of a plan? And I know it's probably been changed with the whole COVID thing, but maybe not. So, do you have anything specifically that falls in your 5 and 10 year plan that you'd like to see occur?
Yeah, I mean, ours is pretty simple. There's the growth in the three sectors. So we wanna be in residential, commercial, and public, um, and grow those three sectors. And we have revenue goals attached to those, and location goals. But I think what I'm working with my team on, is starting to think about the industry, right? So I'm in the masonry and concrete industry, and that's a subset of construction. So I'm looking at how can we add value for an entire industry. So in the 10-year plan, we're looking at, what does it look like to up level the training and the skills of the entire industry, and also how that affects construction as a whole. So I have a brand called the Undercover Contractor, where I'm helping homeowners, avoid scams, prepare for, how to, find, vet, hire, and manage contractors is the subtitle. But it's so we're really, I have my team thinking about, okay, DiBara masonry is a staple in masonry and concrete. That's fine. We're going to grow, but how do we start looking at the industry, our sector, and who we benefit, right? So looking at how do we benefit homeowners, how can we benefit general contractors, to make the whole process better, because everybody wins when that's the case.
Do you kind of leaning on your skills and ability, what do you think has helped you in business? What skills and ability do you think that you possess that has helped the business overall?
Well, I think so. It's funny. I think growing up in the field the way I did helped me a lot in business because I was a young guy. I was 14, 15, running crews, right? So my dad, he didn't have a governor on the engine, so to speak. It was like
Hmm.
as fast as I could get there, I was there. There was no seniority. There was no ego. It was like, look, if my son can lay 350 block and you're laying 300, you're gonna mix his mortar. Like that was it. Um,
Yeah.
he didn't care. So but him being that kind of leader, it's like that's great for him to say that and walk off the job. But if I'm the one who's got to deal with the guy for the rest of the day, it's like you learn. I learned through kind of progressing in the field, so that I think was important. The other piece that helped me a lot was taking an honest inventory of what I was truly good at. I think that was for me was paramount as a leader. There were a lot of things that I did naturally that I learned in the field, but there's a lot of things that I was weak at, and acknowledging those weaknesses I think was a key trait. A lot of my mentors and leaders that I studied, I mean, you'd hear them all the time, like I'm not the best at that, or I have somebody else do that, or it's this level of openness and acceptance of look, I might not be the best at this, but I'm open and humble enough to admit it and learn it.
And what you just said is what I think a lot of people could take some great value from. That it's hard when people ask you that question. I always tell people that, well, I can tell you a lot about my weaknesses. Can't tell you too much about my strengths. And doing it,
Yeah.
what you said is key. Is taking an inventory of where you're at, and then surround yourself with people that will help prop up those weaknesses. Because you can work on your weaknesses all you want, but that just makes you okay. you
Yeah.
know but if you focus on your strength and then surround yourself with someone who can help you with those weaknesses, it's amazing how much I can help you in your business. So and that's what honestly, personally, I love about being the CEO of my company, is that now I can do the things that I really want to do and I'm good at, rather than doing the things I don't really like doing. But what do you think is the key strengths of your businesses, of your business today?
I think we're very I'm a simple guy, right? So I think that's a huge part of it. I don't like to overcomplicate things. So so that's part of it. And the other thing is we have a thing in my company of saying it's never lower the target. So when I look at a problem in an industry or a sector in our business, so for example, it was like, well, there's not a lot of good masons and concrete finishers anymore, right? So we could lower the quality, or we could recruit nationally and not lower the target. And so that's one of the things we've done, tangible examples. So one of the strengths of our company is looking at what needs to happen, regardless of how easy it is, how feasible it is, how much it costs. We have those good, honest. We take good, honest inventory of it. So when we realize, like, look, we need guys that are, team members that are well versed in, masonry and concrete and even general construction, because it benefits the client, right? In commercial, public, or even in residential, it's like that's the target, and how we get there is a separate conversation. I think that's really made us unique because it's forced us to do a lot of things where some people might want to just be like, well, we can get by without it, or it's good enough, and that to us in our culture doesn't work. It's this is what's the most valuable, and this is we're gonna find a way to get there.
If you had to give advice to somebody, both personal and professional, that may be either entering the industry or in the industry and is looking to become an executive someday, what kind of advice would you give them, both personally and professionally?
I think the advice I'd give. I even think back to myself, 5 6 years ago, is fall in love with the industry. Truly, I mean that I think that when there's a true love and a passion for your industry, not just the business management side of it, or vice versa. If it's if you're in the field and you want to grow and progress, falling in love with the business management side of it, I think that's important. Um, because your mind will help you find ways and think when there's that level of passion and investment. And the other thing is for me, I can speak to myself, was I thought too small for too many years. And I think not setting small targets, not being afraid to think big, I mean, we could have done commercial work 6 years ago, to give you an example, right? But it was like, well, we don't need to. We're good with these residential jobs. They're big enough, and it was making sense of things. And when at the end of the day, our goal was to grow in this industry and to help the entire sector. So it's not setting small targets and not being scared to think big. My biggest regret as a business owner, as an executive owning multiple businesses, is that I thought too small in the onset.
And that's a tough one, because not and I think it gets even tougher the longer your business is in business and the longer you're doing it, because you set up a paradigm of where it's supposed to be. And I always people my people hate the word paradigm because I say it all the time, but it's truth. You have a paradigm. This is the way things are supposed to be, and it's tough to break that cycle. So that's why I lean on a lot of other people and get a lot of advice from other people, because especially young people, when the young people come in the company, I always try to solicit input from them, because it's funny what they can see and what I can't see. So if you had to list out some of your biggest failures and some of your biggest successes, and what would you everyone likes to hear a story here, so tell me a little bit about what you feel was some of your bigger failures and some of your biggest successes.
Biggest failures, gosh, I mean, we all have a lot of them.
Some people don't like failures. Some people say learning experiences.
Yeah, exactly. I've had a lot of those. I think the biggest learning experience is what what are the priorities for when you're balancing a lot of different things. When you have a high target, it's how do you prioritize? Because in some situations, somebody has to sit. When you have multiple clients or multiple employees or multiple objectives, and things don't go as planned, what moves? What takes second seat and third seat? Prioritization. I mean, I can think of stories where we sold two massive projects, and they both ended up kicking off at the same time, and it was my idea that we were going to be able to manage and run both of them. And then what happened with COVID was we had to set a crew, a crew of guys that had to go off the job because the job site had an outbreak, not by our crews, but they had to get tested, and so it was probably a poor call on my end to split things so thin instead of focusing and having an honest conversation about what we can accurately achieve, even if for that general contractor in that relationship, they didn't love the news. I mean, he had too many people on the job. It ended up getting shut down anyway. So I should have been the one to say, you know what, I have my crew. I'm going to have a big crew here. We're going to do this really quick, and then we're going to come to you. Huge growth opportunity there. Even in the residential sector, I think it was, the biggest thing that held me back was not being willing to take that next step. I think we get invitations in this industry, and I think if you think back to kind of your career, I like to think of it as invitations, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like, you'll be doing work for a residential client, right? Let's say, and they'll invite you into the commercial world. Or if it's commercial, it's public. If it's, or if it's commercial, it's a job bigger than you've ever done before. And I think it's really, really important to take those invitations, tying back to your paradigm, and to really think about them, because that's what it is. It's an invitation, and not if your biggest job you've ever done is $10 million and you get an invitation to do a $15 million job, it's probably worth thinking about, because that
Mm-hmm.
might be an invitation for you to go to the next level.
And it's I, if you look back at like psychology and you talk about like different things people are afraid of, and the unknown is one of the top ones. We always say number two is always public speaking. Oh no, number one has usually been public speaking. Number two is usually death, which is funny because I'd rather die than to speak publicly. but it's funny how like how much fear controls people, and I fight it every day. Sometimes I get you fight the fear of not being comfortable. That's the comfortability is the hard thing. So what's the future of your business?
For us, we're going to scale up those three sectors. I want to take the brand and train all the masonry companies across the country in what we're doing. Because again, I'm looking at the industry now. I want to help homeowners, so we're doing that. The Undercover Contractor, the book for homeowners, the podcast for homeowners. My family's been invested in this industry for over 102 years, and it's time as I grow and continue to grow this company to really start looking at who's in need the most. And I think there's a lot of masonry contractors, commercial, public, residential, that are stuck, and we're not stuck. We're growing year over year, and it's phenomenal. But it's how do I give back to other masonry contractors or other homeowners, looking at it from that level. I mean, we'll continue to grow in Los Angeles and maybe move throughout the state, have a few more locations, but I think the mission and purpose is much bigger than just what can DiBara Masonry do in terms of physical work.
Well, no one could claim you don't think big. So so I give you credit, because that's a big vision, and I think the difference between you and other people is that you actually are willing to go through the task to get it to where it needs to go, and because you have that passion and that desire. So you can't teach passion, so
No.
so we're to our speed round. And our speed round, we're gonna I want you to rate these different categories of construction on a 1 to 10 scale, 1 being the least, 10 being the best, most important. They could all be 10s, so
Okay.
that's okay. But I just want to get your perspective on it. So we'll go ahead and kick it off with scheduling.
Scheduling at 9.
A 9. And why would you say scheduling is a 9?
Because I think that it's very important, but I wouldn't say it's the most important thing. Because if it's going to sacrifice quality, it's not worth it. I mean, it ties back to the COVID example, right? Or it causes more problems. So it's very important, but there is those few examples and times where it's like, look, I'm not willing to put my crew there for this reason. Schedule's gonna have to wait.
Estimating.
I mean, that's a 10. That's. I mean, if you're off on your numbers, it sets the expectation. The schedule's built off the estimate. I mean, that's huge, paramount.
So the next one I have is contracts and contract administration. Contracts, talking about the paper contract itself, and contract administration, execution of that contract.
I'd love to say it's a 1. When I grew up as a kid, it was, even on the bigger stuff, it wasn't as important. But I would say it's a 10 nowadays, to really have a clear expectation of what you're looking to do.
What about design?
In terms of, I mean, yeah, design in any element. I mean, because that affects the estimate, it affects the schedule. I mean, they're all integral. Yeah, I would say that's a 10.
Accounting.
Accounting, I would say probably another 10. I mean, they're all. I'm a 10. I'm gonna probably be your 10 across the board. Yeah.
What
10,
about?
I mean,
I think I know the answer to this one, but I'm going to ask you anyhow. Selling work or business development.
10. I mean, you owe it to your team and to do great work for your clients too.
And last but not least, leadership.
Oh man, 10.
Yeah. Well, Matt, I want to thank you. I had a chance to do a little background on you and just talking with you here today. I'm very impressed with what you guys bring to the table. You have taken something that has gone through your family and taken it to the next level. And that's a great thing. And the fact that you moved across the country, although I'm not, LA's a cool place, no question. But I'd probably prefer Boston if you ask me. Even without the weather, okay, without the weather. But I want to commend you for that, because you're not just a professional. You're a professional that has this keen sight on learning and growing, and never being satisfied for where you're at. And that's just a formula for success altogether. So I want to give you the last word, like I do all the people we interview on the podcast.
Yeah, no, I truly appreciate being here. It's humbling to talk with you and to share my story, and I'm hoping that it offers a lot of value to our listeners. And yeah, I mean, there's one of my mentors, I remember he said to me something, and it doesn't apply to everything, but I think it's interesting. And he said to me, when I was asking him about trying some new marketing things and really growing the business, and he said, if you can, you must. And so it's an interesting perspective on digging deep internally and asking yourself, do you really feel like you can do it? And if so, and again, you'll take it with a grain of salt, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a powerful saying when you're looking at something and evaluating that fear factor you talked about, as if if it's a worthy goal, if you can, you must. So it's an interesting perspective.
Well, that's a great way to end our podcast today. If you can, you must. That's a great one. And I want to thank you again, Matt, and I want to thank our audience. Tune in next week for another episode of CONEXEC.